Okay, so hello, friends. Thank you so much for being here. I started playing the trumpet um, in 10th grade. Or actually, no, I started playing a wind instrument in 7th grade. And then at that point, I played the flute, which I didn't love. Then I switched to the trumpet. Then I was really good on the trumpet. I enjoyed it until I got braces in the 10th grade, and it hurt far too much to play. My band teacher at the time recommended switching to the euphonium, which is kind of like a baby tuba. The mouthpiece on the euphonium is bigger than the trumpet mouthpiece, which was good. But so it hurt a lot less, but it wasn't as much fun. The trumpet, I was good enough to be in the jazz band, but there aren't even euphoniums in jazz band. But nevertheless, I stayed with euphonium through my first year at university and even after my braces were removed. And I played in the concert band and wind ensemble. In my second year in college, my band teacher suggested I switch to French horn, and so I did. And I continued playing the horn through my 20s. I really loved it. I had found my passion. There are no French horns in jazz band either, but there are French horns in band, wind ensemble, orchestra, brass, woodwind quintets. Mozart wrote four horn concertos. I don't think he wrote one for the euphonium. I got good enough on the horn to study at a conservatory and go to music festivals and to study with one of the best horn players ever. And when I was preparing this talk, I did a search for my teacher, David Jolly, and I stumbled on this New York Times article that mentioned him. The title is The French Horn, That Wild Card of the Orchestra. And it mentioned Dave Jolly and how even he got in a tangle sometimes. One of the commenters on the article likened playing the French horn to riding a unicycle on ice. So, for reasons having to do with physics and harmonics and tubing and other foundational concepts that I still can't quite grasp, the French horn is a singularly difficult instrument to master. I reached an intermediate level with good musicianship and moderate technical skill, but I also discovered that I had debilitating stage fright. And that was exacerbated by my lack of preparation and by my incorrect musculature, which on a wind instrument is called an embouchure. This diagram illustrates a French horn embouchure, and it shows a profile outline of a nose, mouth, and jaw. And there's a mouthpiece pressed against the mouth, and all of the associated musculature is illustrated. If I was going to be able to move to the next level, I would need to change my embouchure, all those muscles, and start over again. For a time, I worked really hard to unlearn and relearn how to play the horn. But in the end, I moved on. It was too hard. Like many starving musicians at the time, I pivoted to working in tech. I had some natural aptitude and a decent work ethic and really great mentors. I worked first at Yale University on instructional CD-ROMs, and then the web came along. At first, I was working at Dartmouth College as an instructional technologist, and I was teaching Dartmouth faculty in classics and engineering to write HTML code and use Photoshop when it happened again. A person who believed in my potential invited me down a path toward meaningful work. And this time it was Joe O'Connor, who many of us will fondly remember as Accessible Joe. In 2000, Joe asked me to present a session on accessibility at a new media centers conference in Monterey, California. I was co-author of Web Style Guide with Pat Lynch, so I knew something about digital design, but not much of anything about accessibility. And in keeping with my usual mode of decision making, I said, sure. Um, and as with French horn, that was really a turning point for me. Learning about accessibility gave meaning to my work. It helped me understand and appreciate the role of design and technology as enablers. And the rest is history. I've been working and writing and speaking about accessibility since then. But in preparing for this talk, I reflected on my experience as a horn player. Maybe it's the wisdom that comes with age and hindsight, but I know now that there can be significant cost to doing without understanding. And no one was harmed too much because of my unstable embouchure. I can't say the same thing as a designer and a maker, as a teacher and a mentor. That approach of making things up as you go really allows you to build surface level skills and facility, but without truly understanding the many dimensions that compromise the foundations. I wish I had started my accessibility journey with a better understanding of the domain and the problem space, those foundations of digital accessibility and disability inclusion. So today we're going to return to those foundations and talk through some of the concepts and misconceptions that have impeded progress toward universal access in the digital world. I'll be playing some old tunes and some new ones, and I do hope you enjoy the show. We'll start with universality and the origins of the web. Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web while working at the CERN Research Center in Switzerland in the late 1980s. He was trying to address the problem of dealing with large quantities of information, so reports, notes, documentation stored all over the place on different systems, in databases, in help systems. You needed to have different hardware and software to get at the information, and the information on one system was not connected to the information on another. So he had this idea for storing information on network servers that could be accessed through browsers that would run on any operating system and that would make meaningful connections and link information together. This system would provide better access to existing information and allow a pool of information to develop, grow, and evolve. This diagram is the web concept diagram from his first proposal. He included the diagram in his original proposal to illustrate the concept of the web. The diagram style is old school with pixelated graphics and text. There are three independent computers linked to two hypertext servers. And the annotations explain that the computers have a client browser program that runs on many platforms, and a note about the servers that information on one server refers to information on another. Now, refers was probably a spelling error. He probably meant refers, but then again, who knows? In the timeline from proposal to World Wide Web, he submitted an initial proposal in March of 1989, Information Management, a proposal, and a second, more developed proposal in 1990, World Wide Web, proposal for a hypertext project. And by December of 1990s, the World Wide Web software was up and running at CERN. And the first published website, which was a site describing the project itself, was available to the public in 1991. And it's hard to imagine now, but at that time, computers were like little islands. A lot could happen on a computer, but it was localized to that computer. So, this idea that the vast universe of computers, of diverse software, hardware, operating system, document formats could all be networked and communicate as part of one universal whole was a radical idea. And that concept of universality is at the core of the web. It's the foundational concept of the web. In his proposal, he aims for universal readership, where information is universally available to all for all to access and consume, regardless of the system. But what might be less well known is that he also seeks universal authorship, where readers have the ability to author and link information together in new ways to create new information. And in his book, Weaving the Web, he explains that this notion seemed impossible until I realized that the diversity of different computer systems and networks could be a rich resource, something to be represented, not a problem to be eradicated. But so that focus initially of the original concept, embracing diversity to achieve universality, was really focused on diversity of computers and computer systems, but not people. But that changed. It changed in 1997 when he evolved that concept of technology universality to encompass human diversity. In 1997, he was the director of the World Wide Web Consortium at MIT. He launched the Web Accessibility Initiative to focus on ensuring people with disabilities can access the web. Returning to that concept of universal readership and authorship, he famously said, "The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone, regardless of disability, is an essential aspect." And he goes on to explain the aims of the initiative to ensure the web can be accessed through different combinations of senses and physical capabilities, just as other W3C activities ensure its operation across different hardware and software platforms, media, cultures, and countries. So, as the web evolved, that foundational concept of universality also evolved to extend beyond technology to human diversity and providing universal readership and universal authorship to everyone, regardless of disability. In 2017, 28 years after his original proposal, Tim Berners-Lee authored an article in The Guardian in which he calls for collective attention to the problems that limit the web's potential as a tool that serves all of humanity. He writes, "I may have invented the web, but all of you have helped to create what it is today." And I don't know about you, but I hear an accusation in there. I feel like the web we have today isn't quite the web he had in mind when he invented it. And I know I had a part to play in that. When I started working with the web in 1996, I felt extremely limited in what I could accomplish on the web. Sure, hyperlinks were neat, but what about interaction? What about typography? What about layout and information design and graphic design? About that time in 1996, David Siegel released the book, Creating Killer Websites. And that book was chock full of workarounds that allowed web designers to have a measure of control over design and layout. And he justified the need for workarounds. Because of current HTML limitations, site designers must resort to all sorts of workarounds in order to have control over the layout of pages. And the two most infamous of these workarounds, or let's call them what they are, are the invisible spacer GIF that allows control over spacing and invisible layout tables to control page layout. And Creating Killer Websites came out just about the same time as I joined Pat Lynch in working on Web Style Guide. Pat had launched the first version of the site, which was called the Yale CAIM Web Style Guide in 1993, just when the web was born. And I joined as co-author on the website in 1997. And the first print version of the book came out in 1999, and we published our fourth edition in 2026. And even after publishing the book in print, we always posted the complete contents online and left the past editions online too, warts and all. So I was easily able to find this example of layout tables from Web Style Guide First Edition. In it, we instruct readers on how to use invisible tables and spacer graphics to achieve layout effects. In this case, the the text describing the technique wraps around a bird illustration. The text reads, "It is possible to approximate wrapping text around a graphic by splitting the image into two parts and combining the images and text in a table." I'm not sure what kind of bird it is. Pat does the birds, but it looks a bit like a chicken with long legs and a long bill. The web at this time had no layout options. You could basically just pour text on a web page. So invisible tables provided a way to achieve this wraparound effect. And to do it, we split the bird image into two, with the head and body in one full width table row along the top, and the text and legs in a row along the bottom, each in its own cell. And the page explains all the requirements for this effect, including setting the table border to 0 so it's not visible, and using invisible spacer gifts to keep the table cells from collapsing. And I can't help but think that this is the type of thing that Tim Berners-Lee is alluding to when talking about the web we helped create, a web of hacks and workarounds. There's a great book called The Diffusion of Innovations. It's by Everett Rogers, and it's about innovations, how innovations are adopted. He talks about characteristics of innovations that influence their adoption, including relative advantage, compatibility, complexity, trialability, observability. Of these, compatibility can be problematic. When people, like me, think that an innovation, like the web, works the same as other familiar things, we apply the same values to them, and in some cases, we break them. Rogers tells about the introduction of tractors to farmers in rural India. And the farmers had adopted the tractors, but they didn't really appreciate that they had different maintenance requirements from their previous technology, which was oxen. And so they didn't clean the air filters, they didn't replace the oil filters. And worse, when cold weather came, they would put blankets over the hood of the tractor, despite warnings that it would cause the tractor to overheat. They had blanketed their oxen in the past, and it made sense to keep their source of farm power warm during the winter weather. Past experience can have negative consequences when expectations are carried to the new technology that no longer signify. With the web, we perceived it as a new way of doing the same things, and we imposed expectations for design and interaction. And like the blanket on tractors, we hacked the semantics, we scripted complex interactions, we hard coded text size and spacing, we made images of text and image maps. We forced consistency on a technology that is, by design, flexible and adaptable. In that same Guardian article, Tim Berners-Lee issues a call to action. It has taken all of us to build the web we have, and now it is up to all of us to build the web we want for everyone. The web we have today is far more complex than the one he invented. Much of what comprises today's core web technology resulted from add-ons and enhancements aimed at addressing some of these misadoptions. For example, we now have cascading style sheets so that we don't have to use invisible tables and spacer gifts to achieve complex layouts. We can post a single image and use CSS to float it right, and the text will wrap nicely around our leggy bird. So we can do a lot more with the web now, and without those particular hacks. We still have hacks, but they're different ones. But are we building on that foundation of universality, or has that been lost along the way? And without that foundation, can we achieve disability inclusion in the digital world? What if we were to start over with a greater understanding of the problem space, of the instrument, how it works, what it needs? And with that, greater understanding, design and build on the foundation of universal readership and universal authorship. What would we have to learn and unlearn? What skills and knowledge do we have that we can apply and take forward? Because we have a lot going for us. We have loads of passion, assets, and skills to take forward, but we do need that common foundation to build on. In the spring of 2021, I was invited by Phil LaPlante. He's the editor of the What Every Engineer Should Know book series to submit a proposal for a book on digital accessibility. And I recruited my partner, Dave Sloan, as co-author. We published the book, What Every Engineer Should Know About Digital Accessibility, in the spring of 2024. Dave and I spent many months working on outlines of what every engineer should know about digital accessibility. We worked through outlines, spreadsheets, affinity mapping, bucketing concepts. It took us about a year just to come up with the outline because we really struggled on defining the scope and audience. We struggled with the should. We needed to make sure the coverage was broadly relevant, avoiding deep dive rabbit holes of what some engineers must know to do their job. We kept coming back to that every part of the title and the engineer part as well. What topics are relevant to every person, really, who makes design decisions and engineers things that affect the experience of others? In other words, every one of us. Authors have limited control over some aspects of what they produce, and the book title is one. If we could go back and insist, we would change the book name to What Everyone Should Know About Digital Accessibility, because in the end, that's the book that we wrote. And you can learn more about our book. We have a site at knowaboutaccessibility.org, and our publisher also provided a discount code for the conference, which is AEVV25. At the same time, I was working as a research fellow on a research project out of the University of Southampton in the UK with Sarah Luthwaite and Andy Coverdale. The project is called Teaching Accessibility in the Digital Skill Set, and it's a project to better understand how accessibility is taught and learned in higher education and industry. And I learned so much from Sarah and Andy and from all the expert teachers and mentors we talked to. And one key finding is the need to establish a common foundation of awareness and understanding among learners before moving on to the more specialized aspects. So we gained insights into topics that comprise the foundations, like the social, legal, professional aspects of accessibility, human and civil rights, models of disability, legal and organizational requirements and obligations, professional accountability. One participant explained, we need to teach them the disability side, the humanizing side of accessibility, the why, and the understanding of what this technical requirement means in terms of assistive technology and access. And because the research project was based in the School of Education, I also learned about pedagogy and ways to teach so that people can gain the knowledge to move forward and act skillfully in their fields. The thing that really stuck with me was the difference between doing and understanding, between doing a task and understanding what and why that task is worth doing and how best to do it. And in some cases, a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. And yesterday, Sam Hobson shared some examples from design annotations where designers are annotating designs incorrectly based on a limited understanding of technical requirements. So this concept of unlearning came up a lot in our interviews with expert educators, with one participant noting misunderstandings can arise just from people thinking they know what accessibility is, and actually at the end of the day, not knowing quite well. So with all of this in terms of the book, we split the book into two parts. Part one is foundations and part two is methods. And that was a way of establishing that common foundation before moving on to more specific role-based techniques and methods. And so the chapters in the part one are Introduction to Digital Accessibility, where we define digital accessibility and describe its beneficiaries and the characteristics of it. Disability and digital inclusion, which focuses on establishing the core concepts of disability, disability discrimination, and the promise of digital inclusion. We talk about user accessibility needs, which covers a range of needs arising from disability, aging, and other impairments, as well as the situational and temporal nature of those needs. We talk about assistive technology. So we present assistive technologies and accessibility strategies and how they manifest in both open and closed systems. We talk about core attributes of accessibility, focus on characteristics like flexibility and compatibility that make digital technologies particularly effective at meeting accessibility needs. The guiding principles chapter covers the principles, guidelines, and standards that underpin accessible design and engineering methods, and an accessibility in practice, which brings it all together with guidance on how to integrate the foundations into a professional practice. And you'll notice that there's nothing in the foundations about reading order or heading structure or the difference between ARIA label and ARIA labeled by. In this next section, we'll focus on the foundational what and why of digital accessibility. It's common to hear products labeled as completely inaccessible, but what does that actually mean? Often products are categorized as inaccessible due to conformance errors identified by automated tools. The Web A Million, for example, reported 94.8% of the home pages have detectable WCAG failures with an average of 51 errors per page. And the errors identified through automated testing relate to low contrast text, missing alternative text, missing input labels, empty links and buttons, and missing document language. And these are certainly potential issues, but does their presence automatically make a product completely inaccessible? And conversely, what makes a product accessible? The definition we settled on for our book is one from a resolution agreement from the US Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, which is the organization responsible for ensuring equal access to education in the United States. In a resolution agreement with the South Carolina Technical College System, they define accessible as follows. Accessible means a person with a disability is afforded the opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective and equally integrated manner with substantively equivalent ease of use. And so there's a lot to unpack there. And so the words that really stand out for me are same and equal and substantially equivalent. And so if we really just break it down, accessible means that disabled and non-disabled people can acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, enjoy the same services in a manner that is equally effective, equally integrated, with substantially equivalent ease of use. And so we come back to the low contrast text, the missing alternative text, the missing input labels, the empty links and buttons, and the missing document language. Do these factors make it so that a person with a disability cannot acquire information, engage in interactions, enjoy services in an equal and substantially equivalent manner as a non-disabled person. Maybe, but not definitely. And so when we delegate tasks in this way by using automated tools to define accessibility and what is accessible, we leave it to the tool to determine the outcome without understanding the problem we're trying to solve. Never delegate understanding is a quote attributed to Charles and Ray Eames, creators of the iconic DCW chair, as a directive to address real problems experienced by real people. And it's said to have been the foundational aspect of their design approach and their view of their responsibility as designers to understand a project's constraints as deeply as possible. To design accessible technology, desktop software, mobile apps, websites, web applications, digital documents, kiosks, public access terminals, credit card machines, video games, interfaces for smart devices in a way that disabled and non-disabled people can access and enjoy them equally. We can't delegate understanding. We can't look to tools like AI and automated tests, to add-ons like accessibility overlays and accessibility modes. And we can't assign responsibility to specific roles like accessibility specialists or accessibility QA. Everyone needs to understand the problem space and its attributes and the needs and preferences of both creators and consumers. Disability and accessibility are constraints, and constraint isn't a bad word. It's the Eames's concept of keeping track of the big idea. So in this next segment, I'm going to share a series of example images from Dartmouth College where I started my accessibility journey. And these are images from the built environment that I have found useful as guides in thinking about attributes of accessibility and what accessibility looks like. They're oldies but goodies, and I hope they serve you well. So we'll start off with an accessibility barrier. So this is an image of the Baker Library entrance prior to accessibility renovations. There are stairs to the door, which is permanently ajar because it's massive and it's a manual door. So inside the door is another door. It's not really visible in the image, but it's a revolving manual door. And this is the library front door. And as the library front door, the design and implementation presents an access barrier to library programs and services for anyone who can't navigate the stairs or maneuver through the revolving door. And so if we think about equivalent examples of this in the digital environment, a few that come to mind for me are like a registration form or a login that's not keyboard operable, or error messages in a login that aren't conveyed to screen readers, or a login process that requires memorization, recall, or uses a CAPTCHA. And if you have other examples, please go ahead and add them into the chat. This image is of Thayer Dining Hall, also at Dartmouth, and it shows the accessible entrance to the building. So there is a main entrance, which I'm not showing, but it has stairs and big old doors, big old heavy doors. So hungry students who can't navigate the stairs or the manual doors need to enter the building through the accessible entrance. And the sign for the entrance is sort of peeking out from behind this overgrown bush. There's debris, this wooden board leaning up against the side of the building. And at the start of the ramp and billowing halfway up the ramp, there's billowing steam spilling onto over the ramp. And so equivalents of this in the digital environment, I think of accessibility mode, I think of accessibility overlays, I think of text-only versions and the text ghetto. I think of transcripts that are provided rather than captions for synchronized media. And if you have other examples that you want to share of an accommodation in the digital world, please go ahead and add them in the chat. The next example is equivalent means of use. And in this case, with equivalent use, functionality is the same, but the way you access it is different. So in this case, it's not an accommodation, but rather an alternative. And this is an example again from Baker Library, and it's a water fountain feature. And the higher water fountain is for people who are standing, and the lower fountain is for people who are smaller or sitting. The experience of drinking water is the same. The mechanisms are the same. The buttons are the same. The water is the same. But if neither height works for you, then you will experience this as a barrier. And so there are positive examples of equivalent means of use. Some of those that I think of are text descriptions for images or captions for media. And if you think of other positive examples, again, please share them. But equivalent can be a tricky concept. It's very subjective. So when we think about, for example, um, a skip link as an equivalent way to move focus to the main content of a page for a keyboard user, that I think could be considered an equivalent, but that's only to get to the main content of the page. And there's no way to skip to everything that might be relevant to a keyboard user with skip links. We'd have hundreds of skip links to navigate through. So a page with a complex page with hundreds of focusable controls, which we know exist, cannot really be equivalent for pointer and keyboard users. And again, share examples as they come to you. So this is the sort of holy grail, same means of use. This is what I strive for in my work as a designer. So this is an image of Baker Library after those accessibility renovations. This was our example of a barrier which has now been renovated for accessibility. And this is an image is a wide shot. You can really see the entrance in context. And it's a grand, big old building with a broad and expansive slope lawn. And that lawn leads right up to the entrance. There are no stairs. It goes straight to the entrance. And those big doors now can be used because they have buttons and you can operate them with a push button. And what's not visible beyond that second doorway is that they removed the revolving doors and installed mechanized double doors. And so, again, thinking to the digital environment, as we learned, the web was really made for same means of use. That's the foundation. And we can build accessible entrances and provide accessible programs and services on the web much more readily than we can in the physical world because digital is flexible and adaptable and so much more. But examples of same means of use in the digital world are harder to come by. They're there, but they should be everywhere, and they're really not. There's that saying, we don't know what we don't know. But as a technical professional, a technology professional, a maker in the digital world whose actions impact broad and diverse audience, there's a point where not knowing and not understanding, but creating and making anyway, starts looking a bit like negligence. I don't know about you, but I find it difficult to bring careful consideration and keep track of the big idea when I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I'm my way of doing without understanding the why and how of using experimentation, prototyping, sense making, figuring things out along the way. I've accomplished a lot this way with passion and enthusiasm and creativity, but I haven't considered the full range of potential impacts, and I certainly have caused harm. And speaking of passion, It's really common for people who are working in accessibility to say, I'm passionate about accessibility. I know I've said it. And passion's great, but it can be really destructive, both to ourselves and to others. And I really liked Annie Ross's talk yesterday, talking about a specific variety of burnout that applies to working in digital accessibility, where we're more prone to burnout because we're aware of the risks of harm that come from not getting things right. We're working without a foundation, without being able to be confident we have a solid understanding of the problem space. That's really stressful. It's like having stage fright every day. No, what digital accessibility and disability inclusion need more from us than passion. They need curiosity, interest, commitment, compromise, constantly seeking to understand and understand better. They need something that looks a lot more like love. In the book, The Five Love Languages, The Secret to Love That Lasts, Gary Chapman describes 5 different ways that we express and receive love: words of affirmation, quality time, physical touch, acts of service, receiving gifts. Acts of service was definitely my mother's love language. And I wouldn't have minded a few words of affirmation or a bit of quality time as the youngest of 7 kids. But acts of service was her love language and the language she taught me and all her kids and grandkids. In fact, for her 70th birthday, we, her kids and grandkids, made her a quilt, and we all made a square. And mine is shown here. I did a kind of tie-dye writing thing, and there's a blue square with the lettering love made visible and a heart. And in the upper right, there are 2 outlines, this representing me and my mom. My square is one of many. Each kid and grandkid made a square, and my sister sewed them all together with colorful floral borders. And in thinking about the why of digital accessibility, I find myself thinking that saying a lot: work is love made visible. And the role of love and what we value and where we put our attention. And I'm not talking about romantic love or reciprocated love and affection between family and close friends. I mean decency, goodwill, and caring deeply for one another. And my love language is a hybrid. It's kind of acts of service and quality time. um, they usually Acts of service usually requires a time investment. And in my love language, what we do, what we invest time in, and what holds our attention speaks volumes about our values and what matters to us and what we care about. So there are many reasons. There are many reasons for investing time and quality attention in digital accessibility, many whys. Like it's this human right, it's the law, it's written in our contracts and our contractual obligations. It's a professional obligation, it's a condition of employment. But to sustain a lasting commitment, we need to invest time and quality attention because we care. And no version of these concepts is complete for me without my last example of same means of use. Tom Luxon is a Dartmouth professor who was one of the early adopters of instructional technology, one of those early faculty that I taught HTML and Photoshop. And his Milton reading room is still online with annotated poetry and prose. He shared a story with me that I've used as an example of same means of use. He had a deaf student in his class one semester who read lips, but had trouble reading his lips because he had a bushy mustache at the time. And rather than request an interpreter, Tom shaved his mustache. And the student was able to participate fully and equally in his course. And in the past, I would have used this as an example of the benefits of universal design, how he looks so much better without a mustache, how addressing his students' needs led to an improved experience for everyone. And it's true, he looks better without a mustache, or at least without that mustache. But I think now it's a much better example of love made visible, of doing good work because we care. Tom is a dedicated educator. Shaving his mustache could be seen as an act of service rather than pursuing an accommodation or outsourcing accessibility to the accessibility services office and bringing in an interpreter. He went for same means of use and adapted his appearance. He was keeping track of the big idea, caring, and committing to his students' success. And instead of delegating, he changed himself. In her session yesterday, Annie Ross spoke about the risk of burnout specific to working in digital accessibility. And although I'm running late on time and I had removed this slide, I will share it with you. And I'm grateful for your continued attention. Um, she likened our profession with other caring professions, and I really, really resonated with that. This is a quote from Phil LaPlante, who is our editor on the book. And really, the reason I got in touch with him was I was inspired by his quote, and one thing led to another. So, this was during the pandemic at a time where digital technologies were increasingly mediating our access to education, work, family, and friends. And the quote reads, "Society expects a standard of competence, professionalism, and accountability from its doctors, nurses, and other professionals who hold lives in trust. Yet anyone can write software that can appear in or interact with critical systems. So, what does software professional mean? And what are society's expectations of those individuals? We are building critical systems and we do hold lives in trust, and we are a caring profession." So, to summarize the foundations of digital accessibility, the fundamental what and why, those foundations rest on universal readership and universal authorship. And we're seeking a digital world where disabled and non disabled people enjoy equal access to information, interactions, and services. And to do that, we must continually seek to understand the problem space so that as makers, we keep track of the big idea and get it right. And we avoid creating barriers and resorting to accommodations or delegating understanding or responsibility. And the why we do this is because we care. We are caring professionals. We care about ourselves, we care about our work, and we care about each other. Thank you for your quality attention.
Hey, Sarah, that was absolutely delightful. And I really enjoyed learning a lot more about, going deeper into some of the history there of the internet and the foundations there. Wow. And the emphasis on just, the why and, us as professionals, which includes both the competency and, the care that comes involved in this work that we're doing. So I really appreciated that. I did want to point out for the people, I will post in a minute one more time the slides. So if you want to review those, they will be available. This is definitely one when this is cleaned up after post-production that I'm going to be reviewing some of the sections on it as well too. I just wanted to highlight, one of the quotes early on that you dropped was, "Now it's up to all of us to build the web we want for everyone." So I think that was the take-home message for me. But we did have a couple of questions that I want to field in here. If you are in the audience and have any questions for Sarah, please drop them in as well too, so that we can get them answered for you. Make sure you're using the Q&A section. One of the questions dealt with overlays, and if you could define what is an overlay, and then talk about why those could be problematic here. So. if you're willing to take on that question.
That's a very controversial question
Right?
to take on, but I'll give it a go, just at
All
a
right.
very, very high level. I'm just going to answer it as a designer. I don't need an overlay in order to make my designs and implementations of digital resources accessible to everyone. I have the technology, I have the knowledge, I have the tools that are inherent in the technology to provide that kind of access. And so overlays is a remediation effort, and I'm not interested in remediating. I'm interested in same means of use.
Yeah, no, perfect. And it goes against, kind of the whole foundation of what you're talking about of, and the professionalism and the why and everything like that. We want to just code the websites so they just work directly for everyone, have equal access for all. So just from the onset and thinking that as our foundation rather than trying to strap on even fixes later, right? So even if they're not an overlay. So that's great. Thank you for being willing to take a stab at that one.
Yeah.
Someone else asked, I'm having trouble feeling discouraged of what you said about passion is destructive. Can you explain more on that? And so dive into a little bit more about that. I think I know where you're headed with that, but I'll let you go for it. So
Yeah, yep. I appreciate that as well. That, and I have said it, and so I hurt myself when I when I when I added that to my presentation. I think it's that when I think about passion, I think about something at a superficial level that is addressing things in a less it's a great question, honestly. I just think passion is fleeting and love is lasting. Basically, that's what it comes down to. And initially, when I got involved in accessibility and Accessible Joe asked me to do that, I was immediately passionate about accessibility. The minute I learned a thing about it, I was like, heck yeah, I love this. I'm passionate. I'm going to do this. But at the same time, I didn't take the time to say, I'm going to do this for the long haul. I'm going to do this deeply. I'm going to do this well. I'm going to compromise things in order to prioritize this over all other things. And when I think of passion, that's not the same kind of energy that you bring to something. Passion might turn into love. And so don't give up on your passion. If it feels like passion right now, stick with passion. But think about evolving that into a longer term commitment and deeper commitment.
that was beautiful. No, like I said, I figured there was something like that on those lines, but I appreciate you elaborating on that. Um, so excellent. Um, Couple of them, they seem to be, there's a few here that are a little bit more tangential, but I'll let you take a stab at them as the audience is asking them. How do you lobby with a book publisher to make book content accessible? And what are the challenges and pushbacks you faced? So I guess writing on your book and stuff, did you have any challenges with that? And did you need to work with them a little bit?
Yes, yes, and yes. The publishers, Taylor and Francis, and they have a really strong accessibility group within that organization. They put a lot of energy into EPUBs and accessible EPUBs, and that's kind of their priority focus. I think the challenge that we faced was getting other digital formats to have the same level of attention, and that was just an ongoing conversation and continuously trying to build their maturity in their accessibility program and bringing in expert insights into how to create accessible PDFs. For example, we tapped into the best of the best for that, John Metz, and he helped out with that. So you know, it's a bit of a slog, but I think it's a really good question as you're engaging. If you are interested in publishing something, having that be a priority right from the start and having it in your contract that this is something that you're going to prioritize, which we did have that in our contract, and it was always front of mind. But it's not perfect. It's definitely not perfect. And the outcome, I'm sure that it could be better.
I know I appreciate you sharing some of your experience with that. Here's another question. I love how you mentioned equal access. When people use accessibility features like alt text in a way that provides those using assistive screen readers with more information than others, do you think that's an
Mm.
accessibility problem? How would you avoid that?
I love that. You all have good
I
questions.
know.
I gotta say, thank you for your great questions. This is one that I think about too. I think that's another controversial thing, and I'd love to hear from people who consume alternative text. My view as a creator of alternative text is very much informed by work that I did learning about audio description. And when I did a course with Joel, I forget his last name, but people will know it and could add it into the chat if they see it. But he's like the audio description teacher person, and he has this saying, "What you see is what you say," and that is what I try to do with my alternative text. Is I try to say what I see, and I don't provide editorializing. I don't identify who I wouldn't say Baker Tower on the image that I provided, for example, in my slides. I'll say brick building because I see brick building. I don't see Baker anywhere in the image. So I know it's Baker, but if we're looking for equal, that's equal. And I would aim for equal.